everyone, and welcome. We are going to give everybody a minute to go ahead and sign in. As you are arriving, we do love to hear where you're signing in from, joining us from. We've been lucky enough to have attendees literally from all around the world join us in this series, and it's always wonderful to get a sense of where you're joining from. Welcome, Mary from Florida. I'd like to remind you too that in the chat window, the blue toggle switch above where you type does default to host and panelists, but we'd love for you to be able to chat with all attendees as well. So do please select everyone there. I'd also like to remind you that the chat window is a great way to engage with attendees to see who else is present. I'm really excited about some of the names I see coming in. Hello, everybody. And as you have questions for the panelists, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A. We have been able to correct a technical issue that we were having, and the Q&A should actually be visible to all attendees now. But if for some reason it's not, I will be reading the names of who has asked questions and the question as written as those come out. But so please do feel free to direct questions to the Q&A window and then engage in conversation with everyone in the chat window. I'm really excited to bring together this particular session today. We have 5 panelists, each of whom have inspired my career in different ways. And this session really is the culmination of a year's worth of work. We've been working on this series since the beginning of the year. It's been an incredible honor to collaborate, especially with Sean Carroll, to create this series. And it's been an incredible amount of work. The amount of research that has gone into building this out, to identifying speakers and really bringing to you the best in the world, leading these conversations from around the world, has been an incredible honor. And again, quite a lot of work. I've learned so much from working on this series, and I really thank everyone for the opportunity to do that. Today's session, though, brings together the ideas that we've really been talking through in a specialized way through each of the previous 4 sessions. We, of course, had a session looking at the carbon cycle and climate, a session on water management and habitat, the 3rd session on soil and regenerative farming, and then at the beginning of this month, an incredible session on social responsibility and community building. And today what we'd like to do is really ask, how do any of these things influence quality in wine? And so that's really the question that we're bringing today. We have, again, this incredible panel of 4 producers, each working on very different projects, but really diligently committed to each of the 4 aspects of conversation that I just mentioned, and thinking about how those commitments inform the quality of their wine. I'm honored today, too, to bring Tonya Pitts into the conversation and to really help us with her incredible expertise, several decades of working in wine, really bringing insight into that same conversation of quality, but very much in relation to how the consumer responds and what the history of the market has been. And so Tonya is here, will help kind of frame that broader perspective. I'd like to remind everyone, too, that Jackson Family, in sponsoring this series, has also created their badge program. You can go back to the emails that you've received from registering for this series to get more information on that. And in the next week or 2, you will receive an additional email specifically again about the badge program. The reason to remember this is that they have created a digital badge for each session that you can share on social media or on your own websites to show that you have gained this additional learning as we've addressed in these sessions. But the really big thing to remember is that if from joining each of these sessions, either here or through recordings on YouTube, you are eligible to submit a short essay or video responding to the question of how any of these sessions has inspired you to do more or do better in relation to the questions that we've asked in your work life or your daily life. So we do encourage you to consider submitting that essay or short video, because that makes you eligible to receive a trip here to California to really put your boots on the ground and learn from firsthand perspective in an immersive way about each of these factors again, especially regenerative farming. And that trip will actually be in in vineyards from multiple producers. So it's really an exciting opportunity. It'll take place in spring of 2022. So do keep an eye out for email about that. Today we're going to be tasting through and talking through 4 wines, one from each of the producers present today. But I want to remind you too that those of us that have received wines also received a bottle of the Kendall Jackson Vintner's Reserve Chardonnay. This is the #1 selling Chardonnay in the United States. As some of you might remember, when it was first launched in the 1980s, it honestly changed the market. It changed how what wines sold in the United States, how people thought of wine availability and affordability, and the idea of wine being an everyday luxury. The choice to include this wine also comes from the fact that it has been referenced multiple times in this series, and it is an example of a light-weighted bottle. It was actually really interesting for me to pick it up and realize it is lighter, but I can see why there wasn't pushback. It feels like a regular bottle of wine. But again, lightweighting that bottle had a significant impact on reducing the carbon footprint for the winery. So today, again, the key question that we're asking is really, what do any of these commitments have to do with wine quality? But I think as we move forward into the conversation, something we want to keep in mind and really think about is, what does quality mean in a changing world? And how do we think about that idea of quality when the world is changing all around us? And, what are our commitments to it, and how do we bring it into the choices that we make? So in looking back at the series as a whole, 2 of the key takeaways that have come up really in different ways in every single session is that to be making differences along these lines, we have to be thinking holistically. To call out my colleagues in the wine trade and media, we have tended to pick a single topic and ask a yes or no question and act as if that's the linchpin that will fix everything. Hopefully this series has helped show no one single thing can solve any of these topics. We have to be thinking in terms of an interconnected context and really thinking holistically about kind of all the levers and how they influence each other. And then the second really key issue that has come up in every single session is that we can't manage what we don't measure. And so we have to really be thinking, if we want to make change, we have to be asking, what are the tactile, measurable aspects of this that we can really look at, identify, and help change. So in order to help this conversation, I'm honored to introduce each of the panelists to you today. First of all, Ms. Tonya Pitts, a longtime good friend of mine, has really inspired so much of my career. I'm really grateful to have her here on screen with me today. Tonya is a sommelier, but also a wine and food consultant that does work with wineries and helps consult on wines through blending sessions to talk about the wine's place in the market and consumer response. She serves as the wine director for One Market Restaurant in San Francisco, is a contributor to Areni Global, the world's fine wine think tank, is a mentor for Wine Unify, an advisory board member for United Sommeliers. She runs the hospitality mentorship program for Batonage, and is just been announced as a new board member for the Women in Wine Leadership Symposium, which was actually the first Women in Wine event to emerge several years ago here in the United States. She's a member of Les Dames d'Escoffier, and just obviously really serves the wine community as a whole, not only on the floor for several decades through restaurants, but also through mentoring so many people from around the United States in wine. Beth Novak Milliken is the president and CEO of Spotswood, and has actually helped lead Spotswood with her family since the 1980s. She's a second generation lead of Spotswood for the family estate and winery there in St. Helena, and also more broadly serves as an advocate for both social and environmental issues, not only in Napa Valley, but for the wine industry abroad. She helped break Spotswood a B Corp, which is one of the most challenging sustainability certifications in the world, and also serves as a board member for International Wineries for Climate Action, or IWCA. Rob Symington is the director of Symington Family Estates, one of the leading port and Portuguese wine producers there in the Douro. He's a 5th generation member of Symington family producing wine there in Portugal. Also helped establish Symington as a B Corp, and was in fact the first winery in Portugal to do so. He is also a board member of International Wineries for Climate Action, and helped launch the Symington Impact Fund to support organizations working on social and environmental issues in their own home regions. Prior to joining Symington, Rob worked as a business consultant and entrepreneur for more than 10 years in London. Chris Carpenter is the winemaker for several top wineries in Napa Valley. Among them are Cardinal, La Jolla, La Jota, Caladon, and as we'll see today, Mount Brave. And he also actually incredibly makes wine in McLaren Vale, Australia through Hickenbotham Clarendon. He specializes, I would say, in mountain tannin. So I'm very excited to hear his perspective on that idea of mountain structure in red wines. He founded the Napa Valley chapter of Slow Food and served as a board member of the Napa Valley Youth Symphony. And I told him earlier I was not going to mention that his favorite job was actually as a bartender in an Irish bar for quite a few years in Chicago. So I'm not going to bring that up. Now, finally, Sarah Wuethrich, I'm so sorry, Sarah. I've done this a couple of times. Like, I'll practice the name and then at the last minute be unable to say it. So will you please say your name for me?
Sure, Sarah Wuethrich.
Wuethrich, excuse me. Thank you for that. So Sarah Wuethrich is the winemaker for Maggy wines from the deep end of Anderson Valley, and has had a long-standing, more than a decade passion for that region of California. She fell in love with Anderson Valley while making Copan wines alongside Wells Guthrie, and now serves as the president of Anderson Valley Wine Growers Association. She has, however, made Pinot Noir from the full length of the West Coast, so has an interesting perspective on Anderson Valley in relation to that bigger picture as well, and has also helped lead terroir studies trying to better understand the distinctiveness and diversity of that region. So Sarah, I'd love to start with you, actually. You chose to bring Anderson Valley Pinot Noir, 100% Pinot, the Afleet cuvee. But one of the things that I want to do before we actually get into the wine is bring us into the conversation of farming again. The session on soil and regenerative farming was one of our most popular in this series. I think there's a really strong growing interest in the wine media and wine trade on better understanding farming and its relevance. And one of the things I've noticed that happens in the wine industry is farming often gets talked about as a technical practice, where we just talk about specific farming practices or farming choices. One of the things I think it's important to really bring out to help us better understand what we're up to is the culture of farming. And that really any of those technical choices are only possible because of the overall culture that is in a region, and kind of what that informs people about what's possible. So I was hoping we could start there. Talk to us about that culture of Anderson Valley. It's incredibly unique, and it's really developed its own culture of farming there for a long time. So help us better understand that.
Yeah, so I think one of the main draws for me to Anderson Valley is the passion of the community. There is a deep-rooted passion to preserving the health, the beauty, and the integrity of Anderson Valley, and it starts there. Families like Navarro, who started the Navarro vineyards, and Hanley have been doing these farming practices since the mid-1970s, early 1980s, and have continued. It's part of their language and part of their life, and it's just emanated throughout the valley. I think that deriving from that desire to want to preserve a special place, it leads into these practices. You have to have that buy-in and that belief first. So that's really what I gained inspiration from, is these people that are pioneers that have done this for quite a number of years. They don't have labels on their bottles. It's just part of their language of how they produce their wines.
Well, and even just yesterday, you were there at Maggy Hawk and hosting a lunch for the entire vineyard team. And that's been an important part of how you've worked to really grow and evolve the culture at the specific property. Could you talk to us a little more about that as well?
Sure. I think, you know, the winemaker is only one part of the picture. And to me, it's really a team effort. I grew up playing team sports, and I just deeply feel that wine isn't made by one person. It's a group effort. And it's not just what happens at the winery. It starts in the vineyard. So I cherish building the relationship first with my vineyard team and my cellar crew, because I think that really reflects in the quality of the wine. And bringing them along for the ride, having them be just immensely proud of the work that they've done. I'm proud of it. I want them to share in it too.
Well, and I love too, you talked with me about, you know, bringing the wine that they helped make to share with them and really tasting with them as well, so that they're actually part of that aspect of the process too.
Absolutely.
Now, Tonya, you know, we've seen a real evolution in the expressions of Pinot Noir from Anderson Valley here in California. And so, you know, and for those of us that are not here in California, to give you a better sense of where the Anderson Valley is located, Anderson Valley is in Mendocino County. Mendocino County is really considered about the northernmost line within which California can readily ripen fruit for making wine. People have put in smaller vineyards further north than that, but they're considered still new and in some ways experimental. People are still discovering what's possible that way. So Anderson Valley is extremely far north. It's deep end, as we call it, is very exposed to the ocean, and it is a several-hour drive. If you were to go from San Francisco into Anderson Valley, Sarah, about how long would that take?
2.5 hours, more
It's
or
a
less,
brutally
without traffic.
It's a
Without
brutally
traffic.
windy road to get
Yeah.
into that area of the world too. And so a lot of the people that move into Anderson Valley do that because nobody's going to bother them. Once they get there, they can do what they want. So, okay. So Tonya, talk us through just that sort of history of evolution of Pinot Noir in Anderson Valley and what you're seeing there today from wines of that area.
So in the 1950s and 1960s, a lot of these vineyards were planted, as Sarah was saying, and there are historical families and pioneers that have always been in the area and the region. I like to think of them as the gatekeepers, who are the oracles who have passed down that way of thinking and farming and taking care of the land and the vines. And within climate change, it was really, really quite cool and cold in that region many, many years ago. And the evolution of Anderson Valley Pinot Noirs have always been these really light pigmented, rustic, what we like to call much more old world in style, that we now use the word as classic California, is what I like to call these certain varieties in the style of wines. And that's what we had. But as farming has shifted, climate change has shifted, these styles change from year to year. We have the years where it's been super, super warm, and we've gotten these really big, robust, concentrated, saturated Pinot Noirs that you know are very muscular. Even so, and you look at the color in the glass, which is not what this is, you can see through the glass. One of the tricks is if you hold the glass over your watch, look at your watch. If you can see your watch, we've got true Pinot Noir, right? Because you are supposed to be able to see through the glass to a certain extent. And the wines of Anderson Valley are just absolutely fantastic. There's sense of place. Being so close to the ocean, you get that sense of saline, mineral, earth, rock, and fruit. And that fruit that's there is usually going to be red fruits of strawberry, raspberry, some wild blackberry, but again, not concentrated. So this is really, 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 really lovely, really
Well,
beautiful.
and Sarah, could you talk to us a little bit too about, as the farming has evolved, because again, you are bringing this site into regenerative farming. As the farming has evolved, are there ways that kind of vine health or wine quality have really shifted that you can identify?
Sure. Yeah. So I came on board to make the Maggy wines in 2017. A year later, working with Sean Kajiwara, who's director of farming, he was on the regenerative session a couple months ago, and Mario Espinoza, who's been actually helped plant Maggy 20 years ago. We are really committed to over time developing regenerative practices. So we started in 2018 with eliminating glyphosate sprays. And slowly we're incorporating more and more regenerative practices such as composting, till and no-till, creating more biodiversity by planting orchards and pollinator gardens. And in our mindset, this is a marathon, not a race. It's not ideal to incorporate all of these practices just right from the get-go, because we want to give the vines to adjust over time. And so, the goal, we believe, is to increase the soil health and provide longevity to these vines. They're already 20 years old, and my major goal is to see these vines last for another 20, 30 years.
Well, and that's something we'll keep talking about through the session with the different producers too, just that value of farming to retain vines and how that informs wine quality as well. And so as we shift into actually tasting and talking about this particular wine, Sarah, can you talk to us about how you've selected portions of the vineyard and then also winemaking on this wine?
Sure. So the Afleet, my winemaking approach with this wine is to take the whole cluster lots that I ferment and age separately, varying percentages of whole cluster added, and making a final blend with this wine. It's all planted to Pinot Noir. We have 5 clones, and I cherry pick from the lots from each vintage to make this wine. I truly feel that whole cluster is more ideal on older vines. In younger vines, it doesn't work as well. It translates awkwardly. So I feel blessed to work with these vines that are 20 years old and are really kind of coming into their own right now. And that's only possible to make the Afleet because of that.
Well, I know just generally a lot of producers say like the kind of structure to flavor balance and the tannin profile in general, not just stems, but in other varieties as well with skin and seed tannin, they tends to kind of come into greater balance as vines are older and approaching that 20-year mark too. So Tonya, let's start with you. I'd love to hear your perspective as you're tasting this wine, but I know Chris and Beth both have it in front of them as well. We unfortunately weren't able to get this to Rob because of international shipping, but I'd love to hear everybody's perspective on this Maggy Afleet 2018 Pinot Noir.
So this to me is classic Anderson Valley Pinot Noir. Strawberry, raspberry, orange zest, blood orange. There's an almost kind of rocky, stony quality that's there in the wine texturally. On the palate, I can almost, and I actually do see the vineyard and the soil content as well as I'm tasting. And so when I'm tasting, I may talk about things like that because that's my process when I taste. But this is definitely a cool climate wine. It is not green. It is not stemmy. It is not any of that. And the older it gets and the more it opens, the more exotic the flavor profile will come through on this. There's also some florals that I got first thing this morning.
Well, and Tonya and I were able to taste this wine with Sarah about a year ago, and it's really very cool to see it again now and see how it's like. I feel like it's really revealed more of itself, and that complexity Tonya is describing, the kind of layers of character. But Beth, I saw you actively tasting. Do you want to add any comments? And I love hearing from other producers too, because speaking from a real Cabernet perspective, now looking at Pinot Noir, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I love Anderson Valley as far as Pinot Noir goes. That's always been my go-to. So I already have a bias toward the Anderson Valley. I always have. I love it there, and I love the wines. And I think this is a beautiful representation. I love how, you know, it's delicate and yet it's powerful, right? It has that really nice sensibility of having just beautiful. Yeah, all the aromas that you spoke to, Tonya, I'm not going to repeat all the words. I thought that was well stated. And I love that bit of salinity and that sense of coolness and just that really great sense of balance and beautiful structure. So to me, I love it, and I'm glad to be introduced to it.
Well, and again, that idea of the deep end is to reference the part of Anderson Valley most influenced directly by the fog coming off the Pacific Ocean through the canyon there. And that salinity piece that kind of makes your mouth water and clench. It's really quite lovely to see. But I love too, Beth, your comment about this wine is a great example of how you can have lightness and intensity at the same time. Because I think sometimes when we've talked about something like wines of impact, and also I think globally there's sort of a prejudice towards California wine, an assumption that when we say a wine has impact, we mean it's big. But I think this is a great example, and using Tonya and Beth's description of a wine that can be kind of really light on its feet and still have real intensity in the mouth at the same time, which is exciting. Sarah, Stephanie Turk has asked a question too. Just could you say a little bit more about why you think vine age affects the whole cluster fermentation?
Yeah, vine age. I think vines that are older are more well established. Their roots are deeper. They are they've grown into themselves, and as a result, I feel like that translates into the fruit. It can self-regulate a little bit better than newer vines, and I just feel that it's more appropriate to incorporate whole cluster when a vine has had some time to do that.
That's great. Okay, good. So I do want to keep us moving. We will return to some of the Q&A towards the end of the session as well. So do please keep that in mind. But thank you, Sarah. It's a beautiful wine, and I'm happy to hear your perspective on how things are evolving there as well. So shifting to Portugal, so the other side of the world. Rob, one of the things that is so important that we talked about, this session, of course, is addressing realities of climate change. I think sometimes when we're looking only at these kinds of changes in the place we live, it's easy to get used to what's changed, and sometimes we fail to see it as clearly. So I think it's so important that you're speaking to us there from the Douro, where in the Douro is really dramatically seeing these changes from climate. And one of the comments that you made, and then I've heard from others as well, is that people in the Douro are having to really rethink what an advantaged site looks like, where it's situated, but then also really rethink how to work with the site that they have. And you have been helping Symington to do some of that work and rethinking. So I was hoping we could start there and you could talk us through some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Elaine. And hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm speaking to you from Porto on the Atlantic coast in Portugal. It's hard for any individual often to accept the implications of a challenge at this level of severity. So often, even if your logical brain knows that things are changing, emotionally, we don't want to accept that the sites that we grew up around, these vineyards, that legendary places that, people have been producing wine here for 300 years, that in 30 years time or less might not be where the best quality is produced. These are really hard things on a psychological level to accept. But yeah, we are trying to meet this challenge head on and use science and research to understand, okay, what's changing, what can be done, and how can we share it? So I think you wanted me to talk about one thing in particular, which is the research into the varietals. So just before I say that, the Douro, for anyone who doesn't know, is as you can see from the image behind me, Pretty challenging place to farm. Over half of the world's mountain vineyard is in this valley. 53% of all mountain vineyard in the world is in the Douro. We have very low yields, and as a result of this topography, extremely high costs of production. So in many ways, we're already kind of farming on the edge. What the mountains give us is a little bit of a hedge against climate change, which is altitude and aspects. So that's in our favor. And yeah, that level of analysis is now happening. Okay, the sites that we thought down near the river, south facing, everyone said that was the legendary vintage port or amazing dry wine. These are really now coming into question. So about 12 to 15 years ago, which is well before I joined my family business, we decided to plant 2 grape variety libraries, nurseries in 2 parts of the valley, one up near the Spanish border and one more towards the middle of the region. Planting in two places gives us, 2 controls to compare against. 53 varietals, mainly Portuguese varietals, but also some international ones where there's a lot of research into them. So we can have, again, a control.
But let me clarify, each site has all of those varieties, right?
There are a few that is only at one, but basically, yes, each site has most of them, including a 3rd site just with whites, but that's a separate project, which takes us even more into complexity. So basically, we have these 2 sites. Our region is predominantly made up of the big 5 grape varieties, which came into fashion in the middle of the 20th century. Why? Because they were reliable, but also because they were relatively high yielding. And we're in a region where 80% of production is growers selling to producers. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense. Yeah, farmers will plant what they get a good yield from. But now at least 1 or 2 of those big 5 are really coming into question in terms of their ability to withstand the changes we're already seeing and that we're expecting. So to cut a very long story short, this research is aiming to understand which varietals have much greater resilience potential based on lower rainfalls and higher temperatures. But it's not just about survival. Obviously, it's also about quality. So we're trying to find out which are going to be the stars of the 2020s and the 2030s, because we're going to be planting those vineyards now. So we're finding out some really interesting stuff. We've got now 7 years of data. Next year, we hope to make our first official sort of share of what we've learned. We're going to do that publicly. Everything we've learned will go to anyone who's interested in it, because we're all in this together. And it's in our own interest for our colleagues, our growers, even our competitors to understand what we're learning.
Well, I want to really restate and highlight what you just said. So Symington has, for 15 or 20 years, you said, been working on this project, has invested the cost of farming 2 unique sites simply for researching which of 53 varieties are most resilient and adaptable to these temperature. And it's really important to point out not just rainfall changes, but also vapor pressure changes. So the literal dryness of the air, right, is part of what's also changing as temperatures change with climate change. And so Symington has put in a long-term effort and all of the capital to do that, but your plan is to fully release and make available all of the results and to disclose which varieties are showing themselves to be most adaptable.
Yeah, that's right. And we, as a family and as a company, we know that we can only be healthy and have a strong future if the region is. This is predominantly a monoculture in terms of the economy of the region, and all of the communities, many of whom are growers. My grandfather bought grapes from their grandfather. We really are all in it together, and we're not an island. And so we're a member of something called ADVID, which is an association for the development of viticulture in our region. It's a not-for-profit. It's been going since 1982. And these are the types of associations where it makes sense to share. We will benefit from other people's insights. I had lunch with a 4th generation of Sograp, Portugal's largest wine company, last Monday, and we agreed that we need to find more areas to collaborate on sustainability, because this is 21st century thinking. This is collaboration, not competition.
That's great. Well, and you're also, I believe you're working with Wild Portugal, is that right? To help transform aspects of your vineyard as well?
Rewilding Portugal, yeah.
Rewilding
right.
Portugal, yeah. So can you just briefly explain what work that is?
Well, basically, actually, the property of the wine that we're going to taste right over my shoulder is a large property, and it has more area which is natural vegetation than vineyard. And there's a lot of area in the Douro which is not farmed. Rewilding is an approach to conservation at large scale where you essentially try and help keystone species nudge an ecosystem back to some form of natural health, rather than, you know, the human controlled environments that we're all trying to kind of move away from in some ways, where it's appropriate. And so Rewilding Europe is this umbrella organization. There are about 12 to 13 countries around Europe working on rewilding initiatives, and Rewilding Portugal is working very close to us along a river shed that flows into the Douro. So they were a natural partner for our impact fund because they have expertise that we don't have, and they can help us have a positive impact in the region. It's not just about conservation, it's also about working with local communities to help people start businesses that are linked to the conservation efforts, other than, you know, working against them. So yeah, we signed a 3-year partnership with them 12 months ago. We're doing volunteering with them. They're helping us rewild some of our estates. We actually launched a wine in partnership with them where sales of every bottle will go to support the conservation efforts. And that for them was a really nice communication tool. They're thrilled that you know, people who were never engaged with the environmental stuff are finding this wine on the shelf and like, wow, this is interesting. What is rewilding? So it's nice to have permission as a wine company to kind of reach out into non-traditional areas and start doing stuff.
Well, I think too, it's a really important example of working, producers working with expertise from outside the industry. You know, historically, property owners have been very leery of conservation groups or resource organizations, but that's a really nice example of, you know, the truth is, if we're going to improve the conditions of our estates, it's not just about maximizing vineyard, it's actually about maximizing longevity. And the best way to do that is to be thinking, how does this vineyard work in concert with habitat and wildlands? And so it's a really lovely example of that. So thank you. Tonya, I would like to ask though, you know, we're seeing in different parts of the world, we're seeing this kind of opening up of reconsidering what varieties we've sort of taken for granted. Bordeaux famously added, I think it's 7 varieties to what's allowable in their classic blends. And so I'm curious if you have any comments about how consumers are responding to these kinds of changes.
For me, which was super surprising, but let me know that I was on the right track with what to do with the program and the direction to take it in. I, on a nightly basis, have guests talking to me about climate change and the way that wine tastes and the shifts in flavor profile. The one thing about having time away and being in seclusion, it gave people an opportunity to taste, to drink, but to also to study and learn. And so we're not so far off the mark with that, which is fantastic. To have people on the same page as all the rest of us, right? Yeah. But we are seeing that across the globe, that everyone is recognizing that what they've been able to plant and produce before is not all working in the same areas. That, you know, if you're in Oregon and Eola Amity, you can plant, you know, Pinot Bianco and things like that, and they thrive and they're really wonderful and delicious, you know, even Albarino. So that's completely different. We're looking at Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, right? It's not all working anymore.
Well, and speaking with Beth Forrestel, who is a plant biologist and climate scientist at UC Davis, one of the comments she's made is that as temperatures and vapor pressure changes, regions are not going to wholesale lose the ability to grow wine, but the varieties they grow where will change. So it's some of the same classic varieties will remain, but they might be growing better in different parts of the region than we used to expect. And then in other areas, the varieties will change. So it's not that we'll wholesale lose wine as much as we'll have to rethink what we think a region is meant to grow. And so Beth, I want to bring you in here just briefly too, because Rob so beautifully emphasized the need for collaboration. And what we were hearing was collaboration between major contributing producers, which is a whole new world of thinking that I love, but then, and also collaboration with different resource groups. But, you know, you, as I mentioned in your bio, you actually are a board member of IWCA, and Spotswood was one of the first wineries to join immediately after it was launched by Jackson family and Torres family. And so I was hoping you could comment briefly on, you know, why IWCA and how collaboration has anything to do with these issues we're talking about.
So Rob is also on the board of IWCA with me. And yeah, I mean, collaboration is crucial. You know, we can all do and pursue environmental initiatives, which we're all doing on our own. But when we can come together, we can actually have a much greater impact and make hopefully, you know, really inspire more change when people see, well, it's not just one individual or a handful of individuals recognizing that we have a problem, but rather it's a group of like-minded wineries coming together and thinking, you know, and recognizing not only do we want to come together and do this, but we want to actually really expand it. Because, you know, in this, I mean, it's hard to sometimes think of wine as an agricultural product. Everybody on this knows that it is, right? But if you think about a consumer in a sense, you know, we're presenting our wines. We're not handing them a cluster of fruit from our respective vineyards. We're handing them a finished product in a bottle. And so the notion of really bringing that back to the fact that our businesses are agriculturally based, and therefore we're uniquely impacted by climate change, and it's very serious for us. And you know, as I look to the future, you know, I would have thought even 5 years ago that estate planning would have been the biggest challenge to ongoing success. But I recognize now you can figure that out. You know who the players are. It's not easy. Rob will be able to speak to that, I'm sure, very well. I know it's not easy either. Yet it is doable because you can figure that out. But climate change is something all new. It's a brave new frontier, and so we all need to come together to work on it. And the more that we can collaborate, we have an experimental vineyard as well. We call it an experimental vineyard. We're trying out different varietals because while we think Cabernet Sauvignon has a long life here, we don't know what the future here in St. Helena of sort of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot are two primary blending varietals. They're great right now. What will be in the future? You know, we need to be planning for that. And we also share information always, because we just think that's crucially important. But IWCA is an amazing organization. We're really proud to be a part of it. And I think its potential is great to really spread the word and get more people engaged in really understanding the impacts of climate change that we're all seeing and feeling.
Well, and in a little bit, we'll hear more from Chris too about another example. You know, Merlot is something that many people kind of stopped looking towards, but Chris is really bringing in a great example of how actually if we can revisit Merlot and also where it's growing and really see its potential that way too. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But Rob, I wanted to ask too, when we were speaking in preparation for this session today, you made just what I thought was a really powerful comment about how it's really in the climate of climate change, it's crucially important for wineries to act with accountability and transparency. And when I asked you, well, what does accountability look like? You said accountability looks like honesty. I want that on a t-shirt. I think Miriam's on this call. Miriam, if you're willing to make that t-shirt, I think that's just a really powerful statement. Accountability looks like honesty. But you also talked about how for you, IWCA is a way of delivering both accountability and transparency. And so could you talk us through that a little bit more too?
Absolutely. Thanks, Elaine. I think on a personal level, the collaboration piece is just picking up on Beth's point, is so important, because just before this session started, we were talking about how it's easy to get stuck in the doom cycle on climate. And you can feel very alone. I remember a few years ago, before it became so high profile and almost impossible to ignore, I was like, the world's crazy because no one gets this apart from me. And even my peers, and when I was in London before coming back into wine. But actually, that's why things like IWC are so heartwarming, because you realize that there are peers and colleagues around the world who are rolling up their sleeves. And, you know, I've never met Beth in person, but we have this connection through IWCA. And for me, it's been a fantastically important part of my life for the last few years. and an outlet, a constructive outlet. But to your point on honesty, I guess I would start by responding by saying, I think the instinct of most businesses, not just in our sector, but globally, is to treat sustainability as a PR exercise. That's definitely the 20th century approach, is how can I look good and avoid getting criticized, basically. Unfortunately, you still see a lot of that around today, although it's increasingly looking like the dinosaur perspective. And there are many leaders in many sectors saying, no, actually, on sustainability, transparency, public goals, reporting on progress annually, and these kinds of things are then what good looks like. So you will find that the people who are left behind realize, if I want to play the game, I have to catch up. So for a wine company who's used to saying, check out how beautiful my vineyards are, how delicious my wine is, and don't ask me any difficult questions, please, being transparent on sustainability, which basically means taking responsibility for your negative impact as well as what you think you're doing, which is good, is out of our comfort zone. And I say this as an organization that is still working this through. We are not there. We are not where I want us to be in terms of what we share. Part of that is resource and having the time to actually put that together. Part of that is the culture where, you know, you join an organization where people are like, I don't want you to share that. And so what does IWCA help us with, and B Corp as well, for that matter? It's third party. You're assessed by someone who's not you. There are goals, they're public goals, and there's a roadmap that obliges continuous improvement. So basically, if you don't keep improving, you fall off, whatever this standard is you've signed up to. And no brand, no company wants to have that sort of like, oh, that was embarrassing.
Yeah.
So that's why I think signing up to, it's a way of holding your feet to the fire. When you sign up to these things, it's like, okay, we're serious about this. And so I hope that sort of responds a bit to, and you know, that requires honesty, both on what you're doing well and the ways in which you're like, yeah, we still do things which we're not happy with, but we haven't yet found a solution to. And I think that's what leadership looks like on sustainability going forwards and today.
Yeah, thank you. I think the other really third thing I should say is a key takeaway from this series as a whole is just that these changes happen over time through people. You know, and so that's part of why that culture question is so crucially important, because we have to be thinking in terms of shifting ourselves and shifting the culture. Those things happen over time. And so we have to be willing to admit what we're still working on. So thank you for that. So as we shift to talking about the wine, one of the things I want to remind attendees is if you do have the wines and are tasting along today, you are welcome to also email any of these producers with any more technical questions. We're using the wines today to really help inform this larger conversation, but if you do have technical questions, you're welcome to contact producers directly, and we will include their information in the follow-up email to this session as well. So this particular site, though, as we shift to talking about Quinta de Vesúvio, a Douro red from 2018, it's important to remember that this vineyard, as Rob mentioned earlier, has a plethora of aspects and a real significant range in elevation. The site itself goes from 110 to 450 meters, or for those of us entrenched in the Americas, that would be 360 feet to 1,476 feet. That's an enormous climb. Remember too, Douro is mainly planted in terraces. So if you just think about it's not just handwork, it's foot labor. Like this, there's an incredible amount of on the ground human activity that goes into making a wine like this. This particular wine is 50% Touriga Franca, 45% Touriga Nacional, and 5% Tinta Amarela. And Rob, you mentioned though too that kind of these are hallmark varieties of Portugal, or Douro rather, and have really been seen as like major players for Douro. But one of the questions that came in was just, you know, what's working has changed, and in fact among these there's been a change of perspective too. Could you very briefly comment on that?
What has changed in what
sense?
In
terms of like how the perception of how these two varieties are doing. They've been historically so important for the Douro, but what role they play is shifting as well. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, so our region was known for centuries for port production, and actually, you know, hot temperatures for port are not necessarily as serious as they are for dry wines for obvious reasons. Higher alcohol, more sugar. You know, we can deal with some of that in the short term.
for the dry wines, and our region has had an explosion of creativity and excitement for dry wines from the Douro, probably over the last 20 years. There were some pioneers before that. And it's been really exciting for us to be a part of this new wave of dry wines. Typically before that, there wasn't really a market for the grapes that weren't turned into port. They were consumed locally. And now, so Touriga Nacional, which is possibly Portugal's best known grape variety, certainly the Douros, and Touriga Franca, which is a late ripening, very aromatic variety, are two of the kind of superstars of the Douro still wine scene. And what is happening? Touriga Nacional today is still performing. It's very reliable. It's a fantastic varietal. Structure, balance, depth, complexity, beautiful aromatics, violets and gum sisters. Touriga Franca is known for it's late ripening. So you would have thought that means it can withstand hotter summers and less rainfall. But what we're seeing is some worrying signs. And no one really fully understands what's happening, because you see phenomena in different years and you're like, well, is that just that year? And then you need to get the trend and you need to speak to your colleagues in other companies to find out what they're seeing. But we are beginning to see some warning signs with Franca. Just to kind of put this in a nutshell, when you get super hot temperatures in July and June of multiple days above 40 degrees, you have to forgive me and translate that into Fahrenheit.
Well over 100.
Right.
Yeah.
The vines actually shut down. So the high temperatures don't actually speed up maturation. They kind of stall it. The vine protects itself. It stops transpiring through the leaf. It sacrifices the grapes, because actually you can always grow more grapes, but it's trying to survive. And so what we're seeing is you get to late September, where typically you would be harvesting the Franca, and you haven't got a balanced maturation. You've got a wonky one, things are out of balance and it's not looking particularly good. So this is early days, but this is a significant concern, because I think it was Jancis Robinson who compared Touriga Franca to Cabernet Franc and Touriga Nacional to Cabernet Sauvignon in terms of the interplay, the beautiful interplay between those two varietals. And that's what you see in the glass with this Pombal from this property. It's a useful analogy for people who don't know our varieties. And yeah, this is serious for us, because we've spent 20 years getting really excited about a variety that maybe in 10 years' time we won't be able to work with in the same way.
Well, so 2017 here in California is a great example of that same phenomenon that Rob was just describing. We had extremely high temperatures during different stretches of that year, and we were all trying to understand it. And walking around vineyards in California here, so many producers said to me, I can't make sense of it. The chemistry is going backwards. And now we have a better understanding of what was happening. It's what Rob was describing with vines shutting down. Here in California, though, people often say, oh, just plant more Mourvedre. It comes in so late. But part of what we're getting at is that might not be enough, right? We have to be thinking more broadly than that. So I want to make sure we're moving along. And so, Tonya, I'd love to hear from you, though, as you taste this wine. It's only been a few decades that dry table wine has been coming out of the Douro. So it's really exciting to have one included in this tasting. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how does this work at the table?
So as I look back in my memory of dry Portuguese wines, I have to go back to the mid 90s and pouring Portuguese red dry wine by the glass. And even within that time, the wines were robust. There was this concentration, but there was still this kind of light and aromatic and lots of layers and texture within the wine. But what I have in front of me is something that's really buoyant and vivacious and really light and airy, but there's all this texture, flavor, and power. There's this salty minerality that's there, but these wild red and black fruits and florals and dried herbs that are there. It's absolutely stunning. And I'm so excited to have this in my glass because we actually had a talk within Arena Global And Rob was there within the roundtable talking about this project, and to see it come to fruition, and all the work that you're doing within the communities as well, because it's also a community project, which we didn't talk about, but those that are in that community that are the younger generation, it gives them a reason to be there and to stay. And to give back into their community and to their heritage. There's so many areas that are preserved as well in Portugal, but it's stunning. And I'm going to be really curious to see what the other site looks like and tastes like, that is much more coastal as well.
Well, so one of the things too that Tonya's beautifully bringing out that I think has been kind of implicit in a lot of the comments so far in the session today is, and that we've talked about in some of the previous sessions, when we're committed to doing climate action or environmental work, we have to actually simultaneously be committed to community building and social responsibility. The two are radically intertwined. They are utterly dependent on each other. We have tended to separate those things in the public conversation, and we must be bringing them back together, because we'll only impact one when we positively impact the other. And so, really keep that in mind as well. But I'm excited, Chris, to shift to you. I am in love with this. I was just going back and forth tasting between the Pombal from Rob and the Mount Brave from you. And I'm totally in love with the idea that we're going to talk about mountain Merlot. So we just heard from Rob that 53% of the world's mountain vineyards are in the Douro, which completely blows my mind. But the truth is that one of California's contributions to the world of wine is mountain Cabernet. That did not exist as a category until California established it in the 1970s. But I think we're so used to thinking about mountain Cabernet that we forget actually we can talk about mountain Merlot as well. And this Mount Brave that you've made from the 2018 vintage is such a beautiful example of how dynamic Merlot can be, but also how mountain vineyards can really make us rethink what's possible. And so we're going to talk about a lot of different aspects of this wine, but I want to just start there with that point about mountain tannin and mountain Merlot, and this block, as you described it to me, kind of really helped re-inspire your love for Merlot. And in making wine from this site, you realized how distinctive this particular block was. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Merlot for me has been a passion for a number of reasons, and in the context of climate change, it is one of the, we're dealing with something a little bit different here than a lot of other regions are currently dealing with the exception of my colleagues in Australia, and that is smoke. And where Rob was talking a little bit about extending varieties time on the vine, I want to reduce the varieties time on the vine and bring it in earlier, because what we're seeing is this accumulation of smoke over time and its impact on the fruit and ultimately on the wine in the form of really unpalatable flavor compounds. If I can bring that fruit in earlier, Merlot being a earlier ripening variety, then I'm doing a service to the people that ultimately are drinking the wine into the business that I'm responsible for.
Chris, could I clarify one thing really quickly? Let me clarify 2018 as a vintage, which is what some of us have here in the glass, was not a smoke issue year for Napa Valley. So Chris is making a point in general that, okay, the Douro is dealing with radical temperature increases. California is dealing with concerns of smoke. Notice then what Chris pointed out, that suddenly what that means is late ripening varieties might not be the best choice. Actually, earlier ripening varieties like Merlot suddenly start to look really attractive because you can bring them in before wildfire season hits very hard. But again, just to clarify, 2018 is not a smoke issue vintage. I don't want there to be any confusion about that. So, okay, please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay, that's correct, but that is an ever-present back of the decision-making matrix that we're thinking about these days is how, and we're dealing with extreme temperature changes as well. And I noticed these back in the early aughts when our trellis systems that we had designed for cool climate viticulture that was once Napa Valley were suffering when our heat spells were being extended. So, it's a combination of things. And one of the things that we often forget with agriculture, it is somewhat of a disruptive part of our environment, bringing in vineyards or farms or whatnot. And how do we balance that with the actual biology and the climate of our planet? And Merlot, for me, is one of those varieties that we can think about balancing those needs of the geography that we're working in, along with the needs of the wine drinking community and the businesses that we serve, because it does come in a little bit earlier. Merlot for me started, and that wasn't my primary reason for being enamored of Merlot. My primary reason for being enamored of Merlot is working in these mountain vineyards, not only Mount Veeder, but Howell Mountain and Spring Mountain. Merlot has a distinctiveness that is in the same vein as the distinctiveness that we see with Cabernet grown in these separate appellations in Napa. And the difference for me is that it also has a structural component, a weight, a minerality. Oftentimes in California, we're searching for that minerality. Up in the mountains, we don't really search for it. It's there. It's endemic to the wines. And seeing all these things in these Merlots, for me, was really exciting. It gave me hope that we could compete with the Merlots that were being produced in France and in Italy, where most of the attention for that variety resides. We suffered with Merlot here in California as a result of some really poor decision-making on where Merlot should be planted, and then ultimately with the rebound from the sideways effect that we've all talked ad nauseum about. And after that sideways effect, a lot of that Merlot in California that was planted in the wrong place went away, and what was left were these little jewels, and we happen to have several of them in the vineyards that we work with. I'm pretty proud of the work that we've done with those varieties, not only as a farming unit, but as a winemaking team.
It's such a good point, though, that sometimes the blessing of horrible market changes is that you know exactly where the best vineyards are left, and so this Merlot is a great example of that. But something that you're really passionate about, though, too, is, I think the middle of the last century, we culturally thought of farming as chemistry. And thankfully, we've been shifting to recognizing farming as biology. And you spoke with me about, we have to remember biology is cyclical, agriculture is cyclical, and going back to some of the earlier comments from the session today, like this is a long-term commitment, right? So Sarah mentioned wanting her vines to keep going, not just 20 years as the average tends to be, but like well past 40 years, and the value of older vines. But you also have talked about how when we're farming with that longevity in mind and respecting the cyclical nature of agriculture and biology, we actually are seeing that sustainability costs less over time. I think one of the mistakes we've made is assuming, if we're thinking on a year-to-year budget, if you're in your first years of making a change to different types of farming, it looks really expensive. But actually, if we price out our business plan over time, sustainability actually becomes more affordable. Could you comment on that as well?
Sure. It's kind of a two-part question, so I'll try to, because I know we're running low on time here. Yeah, everything is systems-based, everything is cyclical. And I've come by way of that through a lot of my work with Slow Food. Not only did I start this organization locally, I sat on the board nationally, and I interacted with people around the world on thinking about food production and what that means to their environment, to the social aspect that you mentioned, and how that all feeds into this idea of a systems-based approach to farming. A lot of that's been influenced by people like one of my friends and colleagues here in Napa Valley, a gentleman named Ted Hall, who has a farming system that he likes to call full circle farming, where every input feeds into, or every output from one product feeds into another product. And he has this farming system that grapes feed into the cattle production that he has, feeds into his organic farm, feeds into his olive production, and it just keeps circling and feeding into one another. Then you look at guys like Jake Fines at Holcomb Hall in Great Britain with his I think he calls it multi-functional farming, and the idea that farming, again, being a very disruptive system, can reside alongside wildlands, and how those two things interact and how they can benefit one another along the way. And then again, you look at a woman like Susan Simard, who is the woman who has really brought to fore the idea of how fungal systems in the soils connect plants and create these ideas of communication between plant systems. And her research is mostly on forests, but you can also look at it in vineyards. So taking that to your question about what that means for farms and ultimately for the financial side of it, if we're disrupting those systems, if we are looking at a system that's completely one-dimensional versus this cyclical idea, then we are completely taking it out of the loop that it could really benefit from. If you look at chemical usage, if you look at tilling vineyards, if you look at again, the idea of farming without taking into account the wildlands that we have around us, and how those could benefit us. And I'll get to that in just a second. But how do we look at inputs from that perspective financially? When you think about it, if you're not tilling, if you're not adding glyphosate, I was about to say the brand name, you're decreasing the amount of passes in a vineyard, you're decreasing the amount of chemical inputs, thus you're decreasing the amount of costs spent over time, and you do need to make early investments on those kind of things. For example, we're not adding glyphosate in the vineyard row anymore, but we need to have an implement then that can churn up that soil in this very small band. There's a capital investment there, and it costs a little bit of money to make that capital investment. That capital investment will pay off over time, not only by way of getting back to these fungal communities staying intact and creating a long-term health situation for these vines that ultimately go back to what Sarah was talking about. The longer a vine is in the ground, the longer it becomes acclimated to its environment, the more acclimated it is to creating a quality of fruit that we can use as winemakers, and ultimately to somewhat acclimating to a changing environment around it.
Right.
That benefits us. That keeps us in business. I mean, ultimately, winemaking is a business. And if we don't combine our understanding of the environment and these pressures from this climate change, we're not going to stay in business. And all of these things, I think, can feed on one another in really positive ways. And we've found, for example, we switched Napa Valley's portion of Jackson Family Wine switched to organics 3 years ago. And as a result, I was really concerned initially, okay, we're going to make this move. It's going to cost us a lot of money. And my finance people are going to be down on this really rapidly because it's going to cost a little bit of money, but we're going to do some, one of the other things we have to keep in mind, this is something Beth talks about, is these investments in these properties, if we're going to keep them viable, we can't be thinking about 3-5 year
Yeah.
time frames. We have to be thinking 20 years, 100 years. So how do we keep that land viable for that amount of time? So these were my thought processes. What we have found, let's say with our weeding, we now bring sheep into the vineyard. We utilize these implements that kind of band under the vine about that big, so that we do have that decrease in the competition right under the vine, but we're leaving the middle portion so that, and that band, that implement only goes down about that deep. So we're not disrupting the fungal communities that are interacting with the vines. We've saved 30% on a yearly basis for that particular operation in our costs for that one line item. And there's a dozen of those line items that we've done. And what we've seen over the last 3 years, there's a little bit of a learning curve that the vines go through, which Sarah talked about, but they come right back. You know, vines are pretty resilient, as we all know, and they have a way of bouncing back in a real positive manner. And that's what they've done. Not only is the quality increased, but I'm saving money, I'm making better wine, and that cyclical, that full systems approach. You know, one of the things that we have to keep in mind, and this goes back a little bit to what you were saying about the social aspect. There's a ton of social inputs and outputs that we have as an industry from a winemaking perspective. One of them is those chemical inputs that we're putting into the ground that are going downstream. Everything, if you approach everything as systems based, every time you have an input that is not natural, it's going somewhere. You know, it's not just going in that little bit of vineyard that you have. It is going somewhere. And oftentimes it's going downstream and creating health issues for our communities, which then cost our communities more money. So, you know, this is a pretty broad subject as far as all of these issues that our industry creates, but it also brings a lot of benefits if we look at it in this holistic way. And this kind of opportunity to discuss these things is a good way to remind us of that.
Yeah, no.
I got on my bandwagon for a little bit.
No, but thank you for that. It's you brought up so many important issues, and one of the things to note is, you know, we started with this point that these topics are cyclical. That doesn't only mean seasonal. It means, like, we're talking about interacting systems, right? And as Chris was just pointing out, you know, what you choose to do in your vineyard actually informs the entire surrounding environment. And, you know, Rob was getting at that as well. But as Chris mentioned, you know, these things also inform the health of the vine, the longevity of the vine, as Sarah brought up. And so we have to be thinking holistically. What is the big picture? How do all of these things interact? How does the commitment I make here in this place inform the long-term picture and the whole surrounding picture as well? But that point that this one change had a 30% savings on one line item is pretty profound. But again, the shift is moving from thinking only in terms of a yearly budget to thinking in terms of yearly budgets over long periods of time. And when we do that, we start to realize how affordable sustainable farming really is. And that's when we start to benefit the people in our communities and environments as well. And so I do need to keep us moving. I'm really excited about this conversation. One of the things I want to challenge wine media to keep in mind. As wine media, we have a very odd connection to the wine industry. And I say this as a media person, right? But wine media, we have to remember all of these wines we love, these producers we're enamored with, they only exist if they're able to maintain their wine business. And wine media, we love to write about the romance of wine. We love to extend that to consumers. But the more we can be committing to talking about the business of wine as well, and really thinking about how do we talk about both at the same time, the stronger we make the longevity of the industry as well. And so that's one of the charges that I want to bring to the wine media. How do you help support the business of wine? Because that's what will maintain the romance of it too. being able to and willing to bring these climate change challenging conversations into our writing is one of the things we have to do. And one of the things I love that I see happening in the chat window is a lot of wine educators are saying, let's remember this is wine education, right? We're not just here to teach the characteristics of Valley Floor Merlot. We're actually here to talk about how do we sustain exciting Merlot and these farming commitments, and talking about the business of wine as part of how we do that. So we need to really be expanding what we think of as wine writing and wine education. As an educator and writer, I am asserting that commitment and challenging everyone here to join me in that. So let's go ahead and turn to the wine. So we have Mount Brave 2018 Mount Veeder. I love that we got all 2018 reds for this particular tasting. Someone asked earlier, and yes, it is 100% Merlot. This is mountain fruit from, again, Mount Veeder AVA in Napa Valley. And Tonya, I'd love to get your perspective on this wine.
So, Chris, you know I love the Mount Brave project. I was amongst some of the first people to taste it before it was even launched, and it was blind. So I had no idea what was in the glass, what the brand was, nothing. And the wines are classic California wines, varieties that have always been grown here, and they taste like it. They're very distinctive. There was a time when Merlot and Cab Franc that were grown on the valley floor, and some of it mountain fruit as well, was really kind of homogenous. This is not that. And this is all coming from old vine plots as well, which is something that we're going to get into, I think, before we sign off with Beth as well. But it has the classic markers of this savory, brushed earth, herbs, plum, there's cassis, there's also some baked fruit, but everything's really fresh. Turnt till soil, tobacco, there's this leaviness. Someone was saying that kind of bell pepper. I think initially we think bell pepper, but it's actually, it's savory. And it's that leafy kind of tobacco that comes through. And I think this is how it shows in Merlot, what we call tobacco that we get in Cabernet. That's how it shows in Merlot. And unfortunately, we are still combating the consumer view of Merlot as being this really kind of plum, fruit punch, red wine that's, for less words, kind of insipid. That is not Merlot at all. That's really pretty super fantastic and can stand on its own and is a fantastic blending grape. And this is what I like to call the sunny side of Mount Veeder, because there's a side that gets more sun and one that gets less sun. The one that gets less sun, we have to take that and leave that in the cellar a little longer, but this is not.
Well, and after this session is over, this has been, again, a year's worth of work. And so after the session's over, I'm taking all the wines and going to a friend's house to cook meat.
There you go.
And, I'm excited about how well these all work at the table. This is really a dynamic Merlot, and it's a great reminder of why Merlot is regarded as one of the best wines in the world, right? It's not like we all made a mistake. Merlot is one of the great varieties in the world, and so how dynamic this is as a mountain wine is really showcasing that. So keeping things moving, Beth, I want to ask you to build on the comment that Chris made. Chris was talking about the affordability of sustainable farming, but one of the comments you've made is that we can't afford not to. So I was hoping you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, we started farming organically in 1985, and we've never looked back. So thanks to Tony Soter, we've been farming because he was our founding winemaker and took over a vineyard management that year and had an interest in it. And so we started farming organically many years ago.
I comment too, Beth. Yeah. So Spotswood started farming organically before organic certifications were available in California. Those certifications did not
Fantastic.
come into California until the end of the 80s. And so Spotswood actually started farming organically before that was even a certifiable option. So
Yeah, no, and which is quite remarkable. So it's something that for us, it's not saying, people say, well, isn't it more expensive? I can't compare it to something different anymore. We can't, but I would argue that you might have the same thing if you are an organic farmer saying, well, I want to go back to conventional farming. Well, the cost of that would be now we have to invest more in chemicals and we have to do all these other things. So I just think change for people is challenging, and people are fearful of it. And if you've been doing something a certain way for a long time, I think humans are we're happier staying with a status quo because it's just easier and we don't have to overthink things. But to me, the cost of not farming well is extremely high. I mean, we're uniquely situated here, as you know, Elaine, because you've been here numerous times. Of course, Chris, you know where we are too, but we're right in the city limits of St. Helena. We're on the western edge of the town of St. Helena, 45 acres here. So we're surrounded by neighbors and we live here. So for us, we're just passionate about being good stewards of the environment. And also what we've found with all of the extremes that are coming our way, from the extreme heat of 17 to, that's not the only year, but that was an extreme. That sort of thing, that the organics, and then we're also biodynamic and we're certified biodynamic. So that holistic approach seems to have built, it's our belief that it's built resilience into our vineyard and into our vines, into our ecosystem. And it's allowed our vines to do well in these challenging years. And so for us, it's just such an important part of what we do. It's not negotiable. And it's something that we're absolutely passionate about.
I love your point though, that people complain, oh, it's so expensive to make the change. It would be just as expensive to move back to conventional farming. And in fact, you'd have other ongoing charges because of the chemical inputs you'd have to buy year to year. So people forget that, right? It's like any change costs up front, but actually this sort of farming gets more affordable over time.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the things that really stands out to me about Spotswood too, though, and does connect to the B Corp certification, but just your practices in general, Spotswood has strongly invested not just in farming, but actually in the people part of Spotswood. And one of the things that has come out of that is recognizing actually the more we invest in our employees and our people, actually, again, the more affordable, sustainable farming becomes. So could you talk about that? What are some examples of ways wineries can invest in their people?
Well, here, I've always had, my mom passed away 5 years ago, but she was always like, Beth, you're so democratic. And I'm like, well, I just always want to treat everybody the way I would want to be treated. And so for Spotswood, it's always been about, our employees, my coworkers, I call them, they're what make everything happen, right? Without them, none of this exists. And so we pay very good salaries. We fund healthcare fully fund our health program for our employees and their families. So nobody pays into their health insurance here at all. We have a fully funded retirement plan, which we fund it. There's no 401k match. We just do it. These are all things that for us are just, we bring in lunch every day. We have somebody come in and make lunch for everybody. We're a team of roughly 19, but for us, sorry about that. That's a little bit of a reminder. I'll get rid of that. For us, it gives us time to be together, to spend time together. Is there a cost? Yeah. But what would be the cost of everybody bringing in their lunch in a bag and sitting by themselves somewhere? This way, we all come together, we sit at the table. We're all talking, we're all engaged with one another, and we all get to know each other as coworkers and as people. So to me, that's what makes what we do gratifying, and it makes the people that work with us here, I think, feel really much more connected and feel valued. And I think that's what all humans want to feel.
Well, and it goes back to Sarah's point too about, bringing lunch to the vineyard team and sharing the wine with the vineyard team and really building that community. And honestly, like if you look at business plans for wineries, one of the most expensive line items is employee turnover. And you're talking about building a culture of people wanting to be part of the team. And your point that they're your coworkers is really pretty powerful, right? You're all actually building Spotswood together.
Yeah, we're all equals. I view it that way.
So one of the things too, in visiting Spotswood, as you mentioned, you're right there in town, and you're on the western side of St. Helena, so the northern part of Napa Valley. And so St. Helena has some of the highest temperatures in Napa Valley, but in walking vineyards with Aaron, your winemaker, one of the things that was it was this really visceral, powerful moment for me. It was we were walking the vineyard kind of in peak heat of the year in September at one point, and we were walking, first down the street and then over like gravelly soil area. It was really incredibly warm, and then we turned into the vine rows, and it got palpably cooler.
Yeah.
Like just walking within the vineyard, the temperatures actually came down. It was more comfortable as a person to be there amidst the vines. And so one of the questions I get asked a lot by wine trade is, well, but how can farming help with climate change? What are people doing? And there's actually elements of the vine architecture, but also the overall vineyard environment that are part of why it feels different to walk in the vineyard there. Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think because we are no-till quite a bit of our vineyard. We do till every other row in some of the blocks. So we retain some of that cover, so the soils aren't just absorbing all of that heat of the day. And then also we've always had this trellis system, this wide trellis system where we're sending the shoots up and over, and we train them out. So for us, trellising has always been an important part. I mean, there was a whole movement here in the Valley. I can hardly remember when, probably in the 90s, Chris, you might remember, but where people were all going to, meter by meter, and this is what they're doing in Bordeaux, and we do it. It's like, we are not Bordeaux. I mean, it's hot here. It is, at the end of the day, we want that heat. When we get that kind of heat, we want it to dissipate. We want our vines further off the ground so that you're not having that reflective heat coming off later, right? When that afternoon breeze does come up, which we always hope for, we want it to move that heat out that's been there during the day. So, and then also we're just having that trellising system, we have that natural sort of cover, and that would make it cooler in there as well. I mean, and we also have invested, in shade cloths. So what we're doing, of course, is we don't leaf at all anymore. Leafing used to be very popular. Open it up and, expose the fruit to the sun. It's like, no. And then we also have, shade cloth that we've invested in that we'll put on the what we call the afternoon side of the vines to protect some of those blocks that may not have quite as much coverage, because we don't want that heat hitting the grapes. And our goal always here at Spotswood, because we are this singular estate vineyard in St. Helena, and it is warmer here, but is to make wines that reflect both time, so their vintage, and the site. And so each year we want to express that. And so we feel like the best way to do that is to farm, responsibly, and be extraordinarily good stewards of what we're doing, and have a really holistic system that gives us the resilience to produce the best fruit each year.
So people that are wanting to hear more about this can go back to the soil and regenerative farming session where we do talk through some of these issues. But just to clarify a couple of the points Beth made, it's something that we'll hear about a lot is VSP, or vertical shoot positioning. So that's where we actually take the canes, or if you're not used to vine talk, essentially the branches or arms of the vine, and they're actually trained to be upright like this. What Spotswood is doing is actually training them to be in a V, so they're open. And this actually, if you think about the movement of the sun over the vineyard, what that means is that you're going to have shading in both directions, right? So the reason this matters is it helps protect the fruit itself, but it also actually shades the ground. And then when you additionally have cover crop during the year, you're actually literally cooling the ground temperature, because the cover crop, the plants growing there, are protecting the earth itself, the soil, cooling that actually changes the ripening arc of the vine. The shading over the fruit, of course, really importantly, doesn't just change the ripening arc, but it actually protects the skin from direct sun exposure, which preserves aromatics. And you'll notice as we move into talking about the Spotswood 2018, this is an incredibly aromatic wine, which is wonderful to see in Cabernet. But that fruit protection is part of that. And what we've also learned is that as we retain the cooler temperatures of the soil itself, we actually shift, we reduce evaporation of water. And so that helps with the vine health in that sense as well. So again, thinking holistically, all these pieces have profound influence. We are going to address some of the Q&A as we go forward, but I am trying to make sure that, so I want to point out that I have established an hour and a half for the bulk of the seminar, and the Q&A is going to go over. There's so much to talk about it. The time management on these is challenging, but let's go ahead and look at this Spotswood 2018 estate Cabernet Sauvignon. For those that are wondering, this is 86% Cabernet Sauvignon, and then you'll recall Beth mentioned some of the blending varieties. This is 9% Cabernet Franc and 5% Petit Verdot. This, of course, connects a little bit to what Rob was saying about the like hallmark varieties of Portugal and how we think of these as being in concert with each other, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc in this case. But again, Tonya, turning to you and your thoughts about this wine, 2018 is one of my favorite vintages from Napa Valley. So again, it's really fun for me to see these side by side. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about this wine from Spotswood.
What's really wonderful and I've missed is being able to go to Premier and tasting the barrel lots that are the first of the season. And I can recall tasting 18s out of barrel, and Beth, you all had one as well, and it was absolutely stunning. And to have had the wine now, not the same wine, but wine from the vineyard that's in the bottle and had other vintages as well, classic. Just this to me is what wine tastes like when you take care of the vineyards, nurture the vineyards, are in sync and in concert with what's in the environment. This is what you get. And it's absolutely gorgeous. It's singing this morning. And I think I told you that.
Yeah, no, you did.
When we got on.
And then interestingly, we are a hotter area, but it's 13.8% alcohol. So we really work to manage that and just to create, that's Aaron Weinkoff is our vineyard manager and winemaker. So I give him credit for this wine. I will not take that.
Yeah.
I could not make this, and you wouldn't want to taste wine that I would probably make, but he does a great job at capturing each vintage, I think at its best. And that feels good.
Also, one of the things that hopefully we've made clear too is that farming has a profound influence on quality. And sometimes I think in the climate change and wine conversation, there's been a misunderstanding thinking higher temperatures mean higher sugars. It is not that simple. Farming is the translation point between climate and soil, people and wine. And farming is where all of those elements come together, right? Climate, soil, people, and wine are meet through farming. And so it's possible to have a wine like this in a warmer climate. Napa Valley is classified as warm, not as hot. So in a warmer climate, it is possible to have these wines under 14%. And this is a great example of that. Sarah, I want to come back to you though. We put Beth on the spot as a Cabernet producer to comment on Pinot Noir. I'd love to hear your thoughts as a Pinot Noir producer looking at Cabernet.
Yeah, the first thing that stood out to me, I think, are the tannins are so well integrated. The texture is, for a 2018, I think typically Bordeaux varieties can hang on and age a bit longer, but right now it seems seamless with the acid and the tannin together. It's pretty awesome.
Well, and it really stands out to me across all of these wines. Sarah, with your wine, we were talking about 30% whole cluster. There was a beautiful integration though of stems and oak, and you were just pointing out that it's a really elegantly integrated use of oak here as well. But I very much see that in the Mount Brave as well. That there's
yes.
The Mount Brave is really this incredible constellation of characteristics, and they all work together in harmony, which I think harmony is a allows for the complexity of wine in a way that simply saying balance doesn't to the same extent. And these 4 wines are really wines of harmony, which I love to see. You know, they're bringing together the complexity of wine. One of the things that came up in conversation though, Rob, that I'd love to bring back to you, Mary Orlin was asking about, you know, how sustainable are expensive wines, right? Sometimes one of the things we have to point out is that in having conversations about sustainability, it can be all well and good to talk about these fancy things when we're talking about wines that cost more, but how about wines that cost less, you know? And so I was hoping you could address that, because, you know, the wine that you offered us today is actually incredibly affordable, yet your family is making all of these significant efforts in sustainability. So could you talk us through some of that tension of cost and accessibility?
It definitely is a tension, you're right. There are many ways in which the business case for sustainability can reduce costs. A super simple one is when you have a lighter glass bottle, you pay less for the bottle. So, you know, with more affordable wines, you can have a lower carbon footprint. I mean, we have a challenge in our region in which we're amongst one of the lowest yielding regions in the world per hectare or per vine. And as a result of the topography, per kilo of grapes produced, we're probably amongst the most expensive. So we're already operating with a pretty expensive kind of raw material compared to many other regions. So we can't compete on price on the supermarket shelf with some super high production regions. What does that mean? It means that from a farming perspective, it can be challenging to ask people to change farming practices when they're already, it's so manual and it's so hard to mechanize. But at the same time, so one of our grape variety libraries is planted on the Douro's largest organic vineyard. The reason we can do it there is because it's flat, it's hot and dry, so you don't need many copper sulfate treatments. So in short, I think there's not necessarily a direct correlation between the more you pay, the more a wine can afford to be sustainable. But yes, we're operating at the volume end of the business with smaller margins, and therefore it's hard for what the old school might consider to be like nice to haves, but we would all say, no, this is the new normal. You have to have these things. And I think it's a process of transition towards this new normal where people say, well, we can't farm in that way. You know, the Douro used to be an extremely low cost labor region. That is no longer possible. It's no longer acceptable. Young people are going to the coast, or they're going to work in tourism, or they're going abroad. And so the average age of people at the harvest is north of 60. And so, you know, the producers are looking at each other and are like, well, there's a sustainability challenge here on the demographics. Unless we pay better and have better jobs, we aren't going to have people to work our vineyards. So this is all mixed up. It's extremely complex. But in short, all wines need to be more sustainable, not just the expensive ones.
Right. Well, and Beth, one of the questions that came in was specifically directed at you, but I think I'm asking Sarah and Chris this question too, because is relevant because Rob just commented on it. But so where did it go? Sorry, Tonya Raw is asking, you know, if you can speak to this idea of employee engagement in relation to vineyard workers in general, but also specifically during harvest. Do you have any comments that you can add to what Rob was just saying in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, for us here, we have 5 full-time vineyard employees. They also come to work in the winery when needed. A couple of them in particular do. They are Hispanic. They've been with us for years. Again, they're also paid salary. They have all the same benefits that all of us do. And what we do is that Trino has a group of people that he's able to reach out to on an annual basis. And so we bring in a picking crew of 8. Generally, I mean, picking is extraordinarily hard work. I would fail. It's really hard, but we pick overnight. We feed the crew when they get here a good meal, and then feed them a great breakfast when everything is done, and just make sure that they're well cared for. It is harder and harder with our relatively arcane, I won't get political, but with our relatively arcane rules around people coming to work here and all of that. Yet yet we're still able to do that. We do not want to go to mechanical harvesting. We certainly could here on the valley floor, but that's not at all where we want to go. And so, you know, again, by taking good care of people and reaching out and having those lines by which to reach out or through which to reach out vis-a-vis Trino and our long-term crew, we're able to get good picking crews. And that's super important.
I think one of the things that's important to point out that's implicit in Beth's comment is that how you're allowed to interact with vineyard workers is limited by the laws you deal with locally. And those are different by county, by state, and by country. And so different regions have very different realities in terms of the dynamic around vineyard harvesting, vineyard work. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. It's not, you know, there are ethical concerns about fairness and equity that are relevant everywhere, but what those look like on the ground is changed by the laws locally. So that's important to keep in mind. Bernadette is asking a question, Chris, that I think I can direct to you, but actually, you know, at least 3 of the producers here do have insight on this, and I can add to it as well if needed. But Bernadette is asking about, you know, are there processes that are actually working to counteract smoke-infected grapes?
That is the $1 million question. If you can figure that puzzle out, you'll be set for life. From a growing standpoint, there are things that we can do picking early. You know, we've been talking a little bit about wine style change. There's several producers that I've tasted their wines recently that have changed their style because they have to pick early with the idea that, well, until this past year, that a lot of our fires come in mid-harvest. There's some compounds that we can spray on the vineyard clays, actually, that can block the passage of those other compounds from the air into the grape. Once those compounds are in the grape, there's some things that we can do. There is no silver bullet as yet, and those things that we can do, there's fining methodologies, there's like microfiltration ideas. There are basically compounds that can come in and strip out some of those other more deleterious compounds. They also strip out a lot of the other good stuff. So there's nothing yet that we have found. There's a lot of people working on it in industry, in academia, in a lot of different places that are looking at trying to understand those. Part of the problem is we don't understand how all of the different compounds interact with each other. And then when they get in the grape and in the various varieties that have different compounds endemic to them, which make them interesting as single varieties, how all of these things, again, it's all systems-based, it's all incredibly complex. And to try to understand it after the very short time that we've been dealing with it, it's very much like what we've been dealing with the pandemic without the same kind of resources going into that. So stay tuned. We're not there yet. That's why you'll see very few wines from 2020 from the Napa Valley, because a lot of our entire valley was impacted by this, and taking that risk to release these wines. We don't know how those compounds will ultimately show themselves is a risk that's really quite ponderous.
So one of the challenges that we have with smoke impact is that compounds in the grape skins will literally bond with compounds in the smoke. Again, as Chris is pointing out, our knowledge of this is really rudimentary. We've actually exponentially increased our understanding of smoke issues in vineyards and wine in the last 5 years in both Australia and California. But what part of the problem is that the natural acidity of a wine will cleave the bond. And so over time, that breaking of the bond increases essentially. And so as a wine ages, you can have a situation where there did not appear to be any smoke impact at all, but because the acid cleaves the bond, suddenly the smoke is live and floating around in the glass, so to speak. And so that's one of the challenges that we're facing. We don't know how to eliminate it because the smoke compounds are literally bonded to aspects of the grape itself. But as Chris was pointing out, there's actually really exciting research being done both in California and Australia, where they're investigating what varieties are more susceptible to smoke impact. Some actually are far less susceptible, but also we're seeing that moving towards earlier ripening varieties in smoke likely regions is a smarter thing to do because smoke tends to come in later in the year. So there's, like, as Chris was pointing out, there's a real complex of issues here. We're over time, so I'm going to just bring in one more question. So Sarah, going back to you again, this idea of vine age, you know, you've worked with vineyards up and down the entire length of the West Coast. And I was hoping you could add again just a little bit more to that idea of how the character expression of a vineyard really evolves as vines get older. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess to me, it develops over time and how you care for the vines. I can really only speak to mostly Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but I look to, you know, my colleagues around the world that have been doing this for decades, and they're still able to produce incredibly profound wines from vines that have been, you know, lasting since the 50s and 60s. So why could we not do that here? Absolutely think it's possible. Just with caring back and giving back to the earth, where we're so often taking from them and making wines from them, but how often are we thinking about giving back to the earth and making sure that that's good from our end? So as far as like what I see, I guess just more consistency. I think, you know, what we saw last year with the drought and the lack of water, that was really scary up in Anderson Valley. We solely rely on our ponds to fill up in the winter and early spring to provide us with water for the rest of the year. We had none going into harvest. So it was definitely a wake-up call as to, you know, I feel fortunate that Maggy Hawk the vines have really deep roots, being that they're so much older. But I worried about my colleagues who had just planted vineyards or vines with younger age, because they really rely on that water to sustain themselves. So that's just as far as the biology of it, making sure that you have these vines established to produce these quality wines that we're making is so exponentially important as climate changes.
Well, and Tonya, I want to come back to you and ask you to help tie this all together, because the, you know, globally, we've been seeing a really strong increase in interest in older vines. And, you know, there in the Douro with where Rob is, of course, all across Portugal, though, there's really long-standing passion for older vineyards and really preserving the heritage of those older vines. We, of course, see this really strongly in Chile as well. There's been a real resurgence of wine culture there, thanks to the kind of vine archive that parts of that country have. You know, South Africa, Australia really pushed this conversation, and of course here in California as well. But speaking from the perspective of a sommelier and having, you know, decades of tasting experience, talk us through, like, you know, again, we're talking about the affordability of sustainable farming, that it actually supports the longevity of vines. But now, like, tie this together. How do you see this show up when you're tasting? What is the quality that we get from older vines?
When we look across the globe and taste wines from around the world that are older vines, the flavor profile is different. There is a lot more, I think, transparency in the flavor profile. There's a lot more layers. They are much more, they show themselves first, I think. In old vine wines, there's a lot of depth, complexity, texture, flavor. And there's actually a time where some producers didn't want to put on the labels that the wines were actually old vines. They thought that it was a negative connotation or not important. And it really is important. especially because that means that you have taken care of the life of the vine, the community, the agriculture, and the health of the vineyard and the surrounding area. And it makes a difference. You can really taste the difference. There's this vibrancy. It's alive in the glass. It
Well, and so
really is.
speaking to people about the value of older vines as part of this conversation and the work we all have to do as well. And as we shift gears to me asking each of the panelists, you know, what can we do? What can we keep in mind? Tonya, one of the comments that you made to all of us yesterday was that you're actually there on the floor in the restaurant. Consumers, restaurant guests are actually asking you about sustainability efforts. Could you comment on that briefly?
So quite soon after the restaurant reopened in May, someone was asking me about climate change and sustainability and how did I find wines tasting in particular. And we were talking about Pinot Noir. And that was just the beginning. I'm having guests ask me about flavor profiles based on climate change and sustainability. Because as I said before, people had an opportunity to be in their homes and be with themselves and take the time to research, but also the research part is also drinking and tasting. And that's how you learn as well as having the words in front of you in black and white is also tasting. And so it's blown me away because for us as professionals, it's something that we've talked about for a long time, but to actually have people come in and spend their money and want to know who's organic and biodynamic and about their practices and knowing that it really does impact what's in the bottle.
So I'd like to ask each of you, you know, thinking of the audience for these sessions, we have producers, we have wine media, wine trade, and of course, all of us are individuals. And so I'd like to ask each of you, you know, if you could give us one key takeaway and one thing to do. Sarah, if I could start with you.
Sure. I think one key takeaway is that you start small. You know, no effort is too small, and it starts with, you know, take an audit of your business and your winery or vineyard. Also like to extend an invitation to barrel coopers and packaging, the extension of the wine industry to start taking a look at what your responsibility is in this and see how you can improve your business practices to be in alignment with what we're talking about here today. And so have those dialogues with those businesses, ask the questions, because then it gets them to think more about what they could be doing better. And we can continue having these conversations. You guys talked about educating. There's so many resources out there now, podcasts and people who are being more outspoken about this. Icy Lou with her Ungrafted podcast, love listening to her. And Diana about carbon sequestration.
Diana
Snowden.
Yes,
yeah.
Snowden Sace, yes.
And I love how we are being more vocal about this and people are gaining more interest and more traction to just propel this well into the future. It's awesome.
Chris?
My takeaway is don't be afraid. You know, change, as Beth has mentioned, change is difficult for people, but if we don't change, we're, as a species, we're not going to be around for very much longer, nor are other companion species. Don't be afraid to make those changes. Be bold, be brave about it, and do it. Because if you wait, it's going to be too late. We've waited too long. That's my takeaway.
Beth?
Yeah, I mean, I agree fully with Chris. I mean, as Kim Nicholas has said, this is through to 2030, we hope we did right by you, right? This is the most important consequential decade that any of us is living in. And we all need to make change. And so hopefully, I mean, I would say that my takeaway is not only be the change, but inspire change. And, you know, as a small example, I mean, we bought, you've talked to Kim Nicholas here, but we bought 2,000 copies of this book. We put messaging on it and we sent it to all of our top customers. And you know, that's a bit of a risk, right? Because they're in the United States in particular, climate change can be viewed as a political conversation. For us, it is not, it is boots on the ground, but we want to inspire change. So we want to do what we're doing, but we also want to, in a really nice way, let people know what's going on and just create and build awareness so that everybody can start making more changes and be talking about this.
That's great. Thank you, Rob.
I think my takeaway would be that it's very easy to feel completely overwhelmed by the scale of the systems change challenges that we face. And when I made the decision 4 years ago to leave what I was doing in London, running a certified B Corp in a totally different sector, I wanted to know I was joining an organization that got it, even though they weren't necessarily doing everything that they wanted to be doing. And I spoke to my cousins and my colleagues, and I went and met people, and I realized, okay, this is an organization that's got its eyes open. And I still at that time was feeling, and still do sometimes, very overwhelmed by the scale of the systems change challenge. And then I kind of realized that the systems will only change if the culture changes. So we have to start with a culture, which means that we have to step outside our comfort zones and behave like activists. Even though we're wine producers, we have to start talking the language of activism. We will then influence culture in our own areas of operation, and then somehow we have to hope that we will influence those systems of which we're a part and we need to change, and we can't wait a generation to change them. So that's it's the little cycle between systems and culture that I'm focusing on, and I hope that can be a useful idea to take away.
Yes, thank you. Tonya? Tonya, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I absolutely agree with Rob. We are all activists, and I actually just put that in the chat. Everything that we say, everything that we do, all compounds humanity and our way of life and how we show up in the world, how we're perceived. It all makes a difference. It's one big microcosm, you know. One big microcosm. What you put in, you get out. You put in good, you get good back. And that's how things are. And that's what we're all doing. And that's what everyone else has to do as well. So this was really wonderful today. Thank you, everyone, for letting me join. I didn't go into all the food pairings and things like that I normally would, but this really wasn't that kind of talk today.
There's so much more we could talk about, and which is part of why this has gone so long. But as a few reminders of other ways for you all to continue your education, I want to remind us that one of, again, the book that Beth brought up, Under the Sky We Make, I'm really proud to say that Dr. Kimberly Nicholas has been getting even more attention since we featured her on the first session of this series. She's been doing good work for a long time, and I'm proud that we were able to help bring her work into the attention of even more people. One of the things that's fantastic about this book, that if you don't know, is that the last chapter is called Too Long Didn't Read. And it just summarizes the key points of every other chapter in this book. So if it's too long, you couldn't read, just go to the end, seriously, this is one of the most useful things you'll find. Also, if you search her name, you can sign up for her climate action newsletter. Okay, so again, in terms of thinking about your ongoing education, you can purchase her book, Under the Sky We Make, but you can also sign up for her climate action newsletter. She also just wrote an article that was published in Decanter with really smart recommendations. Other things to keep in mind too, for those of us that are wine media, it is on us to help educate the public about the business of wine, and to link every article we make from here on to, in some at least small way, to climate action and social responsibility. That's how we're going to make change, right? By increasing the conversation. Also in wine education, remember, you can bring this in to to your education. You can talk about these issues. Each of these sessions is available recorded on YouTube. You can rewatch and just keep, you know, a lot of times if I'm trying to learn something, I just keep going back to it. It layers it in more and more. Other resources that are really fantastic to consider, the new initiative, the Old Vine Conference. I think it's the third session is happening tomorrow, but if it's not the third, it's the second, but it's an ongoing twice a year conference, Old Vine Conference, talking about the value of old vines and how to kind of farm them and preserve them. That will be starting tomorrow. And then also Understanding Climate Change is an ongoing series that happens several times a year. There were 2 sessions this week even. It is possible to sign up and join those sessions, and they're definitely recommended. It's experts from around the world in wine contributing to the conversation. The Sustainable Roundtable happens, I believe it's twice a year. That's another group that is bringing together experts from all aspects of the industry around the world. These are all online resources that you can join and you can go back to and listen to. There's also Dr. Kimberly Nicholas's book is available in Audible if you're driving all the time and want to do it that way. And as Sarah mentioned, there's so many podcasts. Again, the one that she mentioned is Ungrafted by I.C. Liu. Diana Snowden-Sace is regularly talking, especially about the carbon cycle and its relation to farming. So definitely search her name. That's a great resource. Jason Haas at Tablas Creek does a lot of writing through the Tablas Creek blog about regenerative farming. It is an incredible resource. And because it's a blog, it's all there. You can go back and be rereading. So these are some of the resources that we would recommend you can look up and keep an eye out for. Remember going forward that climate action and social responsibility are the same project. You must be treating them hand in hand, side by side. We are all activists, as Rob said. Leadership happens through accountability, and accountability looks like honesty. So leadership looks like honesty. That's one of the most important takeaways for me today. One of the things that I'm really very proud of is that this session has, these series of sessions has actually caused not just producers, but suppliers in the wine industry from around the world to contact different members of these different initiatives, including IWCA, to ask how to join and how to instigate business plan initiatives for their own companies. I'm really proud that this series has had that kind of positive impact. And I'd also like to note that Jackson Family Wines, Torres Family, and the International Wineries for Climate Action have all just been awarded the Green Initiative of the Year by the Green Awards from the drinks business. The Green Awards are the most significant awards given to across the industry every year in relation to sustainability efforts. And so the idea that International Wineries for Climate Action has just been recognized as the Green Initiative of the Year is really quite significant. It was awarded that honor for its expansion of the efforts, adding far more wineries and really deepening the effort. This series has been part of that expansion. And so again, I'm really proud to have been part of this. Thank you to all of you who have joined each session. Remember that keep an eye out for an email for how you can let us know the way that this series has inspired you and possibly come to California to see all of us in person. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you especially to Sean Carroll, who's been my primary collaborator in building this series. Behind the scenes, Danielle and Galen and Kristen have all played such an important role, and the entire Jackson family team. We're all enormously grateful for your willingness to sponsor this today. Thank you to all of the panelists today and through the entire series. Thank you.
And wow, Elaine, thank you for all of these sessions, leading them. They've been so valuable to the community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tonya.
Thank you. Today was wonderful.